Hello everyone, welcome to the Datavault podcast. I'm Neil Strange, CEO of Datavault, and I'm joined today by Alex Higgs, our lead developer of AutomateDV.
Hello.
Welcome. I thought today we'd talk a little bit about satellites. We've already covered off hubs and links.
Yes.
And I think, as always, I'm probably going to do most of the talking here because I've got to sort of get across a few things. But
No problem.
there are certain interesting things that implies as to how the SQL's written and how we would generate the code for this to run. But
And why?
And why? Yeah, exactly. Anyway, there are satellites are basically attributes that describe a link or a hub. There are a few different types of satellite in the mix. Some are technical satellites, some describe special cases when you have certain patterns of data. But I think we'll focus on the main type of satellite today, which is the vanilla one value only satellite.
Yes.
Okay. So, these things are more difficult to explain necessarily than actually to see, but let's have a try on this. So, let's say I have a hub. A hub is a customer.
Yep.
And I have a satellite. Satellite are the attributes that describe those concepts that come from a particular source system table. All right. So let's say I have a sales system and I've got customers in there. And let's say I've signed up as a customer 6 months ago. So when I signed up as a customer, I'll be identified. Here's another instance of a concept called customer. So I'll end up as a hub in the system in the warehouse. So my business key will be there, and I'll be identified as here's a concept. Ultimately, Neil Strange in there.
Yep.
When let's say maybe it's a website or something, and I have to provide some personal details to complete the transaction. So you'll have some details about me being entered. That will end up in a satellite.
Yeah, so name, username, email.
Name, username, email,
date of birth,
address, whatever
kind of stuff.
appropriate in there.
Yep.
But notwithstanding, some of that's PII data, so may or may not be loaded.
Of course.
But there'll be stuff in the operational system, and we'll be feeding that through. Now, so if I look at the data warehouse, there'll be a hub for me. There'll be a satellite describing me as well, which that system had fed. But if there were other systems which I'd interacted with and provided them with my personal details, there'd be other satellites from those other systems about me. So everywhere I touch the system about me, where I've provided personal information, it'll be collected in different satellites against that concept. But let's say there's only one satellite for now, make it simple.
Yeah.
Now, so I do lots of business with this company. So I'm putting an order in every few days, boom, 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 and nothing changes in my personal details. So the satellite remains the same. Its personal details are correct. And then maybe I change something, email address, phone number, something like that. That's picked up as a change, and a new row entered to the satellite with the change in it. So I've now got two rows about me, the old row and the new row, and they're both dated. So I can then go back into that satellite and say, what was the truth about me at a particular reference date? So if it's before any records were there, it'd be you didn't know me. After the first row, it's the first row, and then up to the second row, and from the second row onwards, it's more and more about me in there as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So that way, no matter how frequently the changes are about me, you can log everything as we go forward over time. And some businesses, you get multiple changes a day, and some businesses you get multiple changes every 10 years or so. So it can be a very static satellite, or it can be a frequently changing satellite with lots of rows being inserted over time. It's up to the data patterns as to how that looks. Okay, so that's that. And then the next question is, well, fine, I've got a table coming in that has 300 columns in it. Do we have a 300 column satellite, and how does that work?
Well, I've seen people do that. Generally, it's a bit of an anti-pattern. You want to avoid doing that if you can. Mm-hmm. You often split by related columns, groups of columns, and or grain. There's ways of splitting, satellite splitting, to avoid having to have a very wide satellite.
So I guess I've seen this where maybe 200 of those columns never get used.
Yes.
They're just text 1, text 2, text 40.
And they might not be updated as often.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you, I guess you could load those if you want, knowing they'd never be null.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, not always be null, basically. But what if suddenly the source system decided to use one of those columns?
Yeah, then you got a problem.
Then you got a problem. So I think again that's down to a data engineering choice. I think Datavault really says bring it all in. If you've got a columnar database, then null columns basically collapse to very little storage entirely. You just hold the metadata on them. And I think you're right, yes. So if you look at those 300 columns, let's say 200 are never used, and of the 100 that are left, maybe half a dozen of those columns change quite frequently, and the rest don't change very much or not at all. You could break the satellite into bits, saying these are the frequently changing columns, these are the less frequently changing columns. To reduce the amount of data you have to store every time there's a new change, you just store the change in the 6 columns in the frequently changing satellite.
I've seen people kind of group them and split them into, say, customer contact details, customer address details, and those could be 2 separate satellites, for example.
And also you can have other like temporal things in there. So maybe the first few columns are to do when you first identify a customer.
Yeah.
And maybe the next 10 columns are when this customer moves into an active purchasing role. So it might be initially you've identified them and they've interacted with the website, and the next few columns are after a purchase is made, when you have more information about them and they're only updated when a purchase is made.
Yeah.
And so on. They might be in one table, in which case you can break them by theme or topic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Some kind of logical grouping, basically. Yeah.
That's it. So if you look at the metadata in a satellite, obviously the primary key is the parent hash, the parent's hub or links primary key plus the load date time.
Yeah, that allows you to join back to the parent.
That's it. And the load date time tells you the sequence of arrival.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got record source, tells you where the record came from.
Yep. But
you can also replicate that in the name of the satellite. You often put the name of the source in the satellite as well. Doesn't matter. Have it belt and braces. And then a hash diff, which some people like, some people don't like. But the hash diff is effectively concatenating all the columns together, hashing them, and acting like a checksum. So you don't have to compare every column against every column on the way in.
Yeah. If one of them changes, the whole thing changes.
Therefore, the hash diff changes. You can pick it up through that. I think that's particularly good in a columnar database, because you only need then to retrieve the hash diff column to do the comparison. You don't have to retrieve the rest of the data, and that saves quite a bit of money on
good for optimization, both performance and cost. Yeah,
that's it. So so that's your satellite. Basically, it's the descriptive attributes of a hub or of a link. It's point in time. In other words, it keeps a time-stamped record every time there's a change in there. And otherwise, it's physical. It's linked to a certain source table in there. You remember, whereas the hubs and links were business-oriented statements, units of work and concepts, the satellite is a physical link back to the source table that describes that concept or unit of work. And basically, that's it. You're loading new records in and so forth. How do we work on the SQL then for the load? Because you've obviously now loading into something that only has a load date time in there. How do you know whether there's been what the latest record is and whether there's been a change and stuff?
Yeah. So generally, you have to use a combination of the hash diff and the primary key, and the load date time for ordering and things like that. It depends, especially if you have a change to the same record multiple times in a single batch. So if someone's updated their name, for example, 3 times in a day for whatever reason, then you're going to get 3 different deltas in that same batch. So you have to order and carefully handle that.
Okay, so the simple case is there's only one delta.
Yes.
Coming in.
Or no deltas.
Or no deltas even. That's the simplest one. You do nothing.
Yeah.
If you get a delta, may or may not be a real delta. It's just that there's been a change to the record. You then compare that with the latest record in the satellite.
Yes.
See if there's been a change by comparing the hash diffs. So finding the latest record in the satellite's usually a CTE to do that.
Yeah.
So you're grouping by finding the one with the latest
or a window function.
Yeah. Oh yeah, window function. And then you're comparing against that value. If there's been a change, you load the record. And if you've got a stack of records all changed in the batch window, you compare the first record in that batch with that to see if that goes in.
Yeah.
And then if you think about it, any other record in that stack, which is a change from the previous record, automatically would go in as well. So you can collapse that stack down to just any records that have changed. Check the first one. That goes in if it changes. Otherwise, anything else that's changed goes in as well as a set into the target.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's basically how the macro works.
In AutomateDV, that's how we do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what a satellite is. Anything else you want to add?
I mean, there were two other things.
Okay.
So sometimes you can optionally have an applied date or an effective from date in satellites.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I get a lot of questions about how a satellite's similar to an SCD, so slowly changing dimension type 2,
Very
for
similar.
example.
Very similar.
They implement
Except they
it
don't have
more or
end
less.
dates in.
Yes, end dates.
And you
they
can,
used to.
Well, you can simulate that with a view.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, that's another topic. But yeah, so standard in Datavault 1 was they used to have end dates, but in Datavault 2 they don't anymore, which is a conversation for another day probably.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
But useful to know. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. So we've been Neil Strange and Alex Higgs. We've been talking about satellites today. Hopefully that's a useful background for you to work with. Been great having you here today, and hopefully you'll check us out on the links that appear afterwards. And please do have a look at our user group, particularly the Q&A page, which provides you with answers to commonly asked questions. And there's a whole community in there raising and answering questions, quite a lively one. So do check that out as well, and hopefully see you at one of our future meetups. So thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you very much.